When I got to CAP, there were far fewer researchers, and much of what at least I had to do when I was being thrown into subjects that were well outside of my specialty was, learn on my own, go out and seek academics who have the specialty in that knowledge, go pick up an economics textbook and try to remember what I learned as an undergraduate, things like that. We now have, I think, more structures. We've got an analyst group that specifically works on data. We've got folks teaching internal Stata courses, econometrics, and that sort of thing. We have writing workshops that bring together folks from different parts of our organization, and I think has been really helpful for introducing people to different styles of research. And I think you can draw, almost like a small university, you can draw on the people who have methodological training in other fields. But a lot of it is just asking your colleagues and saying, I have no idea how to read the federal budget. Can you explain, what all this is? And, at least at CAP, because we're a multi-issue think tank that does just about everything, there is always somebody who has some expertise.
Great.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Phil. Colleagues are extraordinarily useful. On-the-job training really is the way that you learn most of these things. I had the good fortune and maybe a little bit of initiative that before I started at Heritage, I'd been writing a fairly regular series of op-eds at that point for commentary. Don't write for them anymore, but at that point I was writing for them reasonably regularly. So that at least gave me a bit of experience writing for if you want to call commentary a general readership audience. So that was a useful experience. But my first paper, if I can even remember what it was, because it was now almost 10 years ago, was I think something on British defense policy. Well, I was lucky that I knew a little bit about that from doctoral research and experience of 8 or 9 years teaching after that. So I had a bit of a leg up, and that let me make probably a fair number of sort of structural and procedural mistakes, but at least within an area that I knew a fair amount about, so I could get the learning experience out of the way. The canonical Heritage products are what we call first an issue brief, which is 1,200 words, really that means 1,800 words, and the backgrounder, which is 5,000 to 10,000 words. So my first one of each of those was pretty darn rough, but I didn't find the transition all that difficult, maybe because I was operating, at least initially, in an issue area that I felt reasonably comfortable with. But I think, if I understand what Stephanie said earlier, right, I think this is an advantage that historians have, that I think it's easier because, there is some theory in history, but it is perhaps a less theory-heavy discipline than a lot of, say, political science or economics, for example. I think it's easier to make the transition to policy-relevant writing for historians, not necessarily because we're better writers, we may be in some cases, but because there's less baggage that you've got to throw away in order to get to the point where you're actually writing something that's fairly intelligible.
That's a really interesting point, and I think I agree with it. I do think that all of our organizations probably, as Ted mentioned, have canonical products or products that look similar. So I think that some amount of OJT is just, or on-the-job training is just being familiar with the way that these products are, what they look like, what are the general components of it. RAND, because we're so interdisciplinary, there's often a quantitative or qualitative element of it. Very much depends on the nature of the research question. But I think Ted's point is really interesting. I do think that as historians, we are trained very well to identify what is the research question you're trying to address, and then what are the steps to getting there, what kind of information is going to bear on those, and having understanding of your colleagues, as has been mentioned, and expertise that other people bring that can help address the research framework as you defined it. So I agree with all that, but I do think that being flexible is a big, I think when you start this job, you're sort of thinking, oh, I'm a historian, and then as Phil talks about being a capital R researcher, I do lots of things that look absolutely nothing like history. They look much more, yeah. They may leverage some subject matter expertise I have, they may leverage some project management expertise that I have, or it may be no kidding history. It sort of depends on, and being able to be flexible and think about the skills that you bring as broader than just, reviewing documents and writing about the past, is critical. But I do think that some amount of that will happen as you grow and mature in these professions.